We all talk a lot about ROI. We use it to justify or defend budgets. We use it in some cases to decide who wins awards. We use it to make business decisions. But what we don't do is spend as much time really interrogating, asking some questions around these figures on which we base these decisions. And I wonder if we did, as an industry, do that, would we still make the same decisions at the end of the day? So I'm going to talk about two fairly fundamental questions I have around what I see as an increasingly paint-by-numbers approach to ad spend. The first issue, data analysis is not objective. The notion that we can get to some sort of ground truth about the world through data analysis is a myth. A study that demonstrates this idea quite well was done by the University of Zurich. And what they did is they got teams of 29 data analysts. They gave them all exactly the same data set, and they were all asked the same question, which was, are football referees more likely to give red or yellow cards to dark skin tone players versus light skin tone players? The results of this showed that 2/3 of those 29 teams found that there was some evidence of bias. The other third found no evidence of bias. So not exactly unanimous in their findings as a whole. And moreover, of those who found a difference, there was actually a 300% variance in how strong they thought that bias was. Furthermore, the researchers found that there was no impact of the pre-existing beliefs of these analysts. So prior to seeing any data at all, they were asked, do you think referees are biased, are racist? There was also no impact of the number of years of experience that these analysts had. So they all had the requisite skills to carry out this piece of work. And so this led the researchers of this piece of work from Zurich to conclude two things. The first is that significant variation in the results of analysis of complex data may be difficult to avoid, even by experts with honest intentions. So even when there's no agenda, we still end up with very different results at the end based on the same data. The second thing they concluded was that crowdsourcing data analysis, so a situation like this where we've got 29 different teams, makes it transparent how defensible yet subjective analytical choices influence research results. So even though the analytical choices made by these experts were entirely defensible, they still had a marked impact on the result of this study. Data analysis is not objective. What it is simply mathematical storytelling. I'll come back to this point later on. The second issue is about uncertainty, or more specifically, how uncertainty isn't properly communicated in the results of research that we do in the industry. Some of you may have already seen this slide once today. So the reason I bring this up now is because this is not about Binet and Field. This is not about short-term versus long-term. I don't want to get confused with the uncertainty around long-term forecasting. Even in the short term, there's still great uncertainty about the figures that we report day to day. So to demonstrate this, here's some examples of some ROIs that you might get from an econometric study or market mix modeling or any other kind of experimental design you might choose to use to get an ROI on your ad spend. Now, hopefully you're comfortable enough with what I'm showing on screen here, even if this is the TV advertising forum, maybe you don't love these particular figures. And I promise not to get too technical here, but I am going to add one additional piece of information which I see as an analyst, but I never see reported back to clients and stakeholders. So what I've added here, you may be familiar with these. These are error bars. And if you don't know, what these tell us is the level of uncertainty around the ROI estimates that I just put up. So if we start with press for a second, so we've got here a not particularly good ROI of 50p on every pound you invest. But my model is telling me that actually it could be that we lose £2 on every pound we invest, or it could be a really good ROI of £3 on the pound we spend in press. So when I see a result like this in a model, I like to think of this guy. And the reason I like to think of this guy, he helps me because he reminds me that essentially we don't have a result here. There's way too much uncertainty in that ROI. And to be fair, in most cases, hopefully this wouldn't be reported back. It's not a result we can hang a hat on. So let's get rid of press for a second and focus on just TV and social. So here we've got much less uncertainty in the ROI. There's still a bit of variation in there, but we're more certain about what that ROI is. But you might notice that there's actually some overlap in our error bars here. And actually, we're only 75% sure that social has a higher ROI than TV here. Or conversely, there's a 25% chance that actually these are the other way around, we're wrong. And TV has a higher ROI than social. So to put that 25% into a bit of context, that's just the same as flipping a coin twice and getting heads twice in a row, or roughly the same chance we gave Donald Trump of winning the 2016 election. So unlikely, but not unthinkable. Although personally I do find the second example fairly unthinkable still. But anyway, we don't see any of that. All we see is the client, the stakeholder, in most cases from this research, is this. Now I wonder, the reason all we're seeing is this is because it's deemed too complicated. But the simplification we're making here, with the justification being the simplification of interpretation of results, I believe is having a marked impact on decision making. If this was your media budget and you were told, A, that these ROIs you see here are somehow proven, versus there's actually a 1 in 4 chance that we're wrong about these, would you still make the same decision with your budget? So I posed 2 problems here, and I have one solution to both these issues. What I believe we need to do is we need to democratize the conversation around data analytics. A two-way exchange of information in this area is mutually beneficial. So the first reason for that is hopefully fairly apparent at this point, which is that as the client or the stakeholder in this research, you get given the explanation of uncertainty and assumptions around the research that you need to make an informed decision. The other side of this coin is that the analyst is receiving the domain expertise, the massive domain expertise that their clients and stakeholders have. I mentioned earlier that data analytics is simply mathematical storytelling. How, as an analyst, can I tell a plausible story of what's going on in an industry if I don't know enough about it? There's a quote by a statistician, you may have heard of it before. The statistician is called George Box, and he says that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So you will not get to a ground truth about the way the world works by building a model. It will be wrong. But you might get to something which gives you enough information to make a decision. So I'm going to leave you with 3 key questions to ask next time you're exposed to this work, if you get the opportunity to see some. So the first one how confident are you about this estimate of ROI? Now, if you get what I feel is a fairly kind of stock response to this question, which is all our ROIs are calculated to a 95% confidence level, I would ask a follow-up question. Can we see the error bars around that? Because, for reasons I won't particularly go into, but the analyst hasn't really answered your question in the first instance. The second one is how many models gave a similar result. Now, the imagery I put together here is slightly disingenuous because I don't really believe that analysts are burning evidence. But I will explain some of the motivation behind why you might ask this question. So, modeling, data analysis, is an iterative process. And that means that you might produce 10 models, 20 models, before you get to a final model which is presented. But if you knew, for example, that we only got a robust estimate of, say, outdoor in one of those 10 models, my advice to you would be question how much certainty there is about that one result. And the third question I would ask would be, what assumptions have you made? Now, if you're wondering about the imagery around this one, so I just did a Google image search for assumptions, and that came up. And I quite liked it, so I stuck with it. But I semi-regret that now, because it might slightly detract from actually what's the most important point, the most important takeaway from this talk, which is that this question, what assumptions have you made, is critical in facilitating that two-way exchange of information that I'm advocating for here. It's your opportunity as a stakeholder, as a client, to interrogate and to understand the assumptions that have been made, and then possibly course correct or inform the analyst and end up getting to a better model. Now, this isn't about catching anyone out or rubbishing the work. Although I appreciate, if you're a media owner and you get some results you don't like, then potentially I have given you a few tools with which to do that. But for me, this is actually just about experts educating each other. And for me, that means that a better conversation will lead to better decision making. Thank you.